than this?
No, I don't think so.
No, I don't think it actually.
Dude, this would be scary in a fire.
Okay.
Sorry.
Alright, so we're going to start the second half, and we're on question 7, which is what exactly is social loafing? So Kaufman talks about this in chapter 11, and he defines social loafing, and he says it refers to the tendency for persons to work less hard when they are in groups in which they think their individual contributions cannot be identified. So it's kind of to help explain the lack of effort in congregational settings where a large number of people are assigned to complete a task, and it seems in a larger group people work less work actually gets done. The task is more inefficiently handled, and the result is a poorer quality than if they were to do it in a smaller group or just an individual does a task. So they found a few things to like alleviate that in congregations. So if you give individuals in a group a difficult task, rather than like an easy one, they're more able to complete that. And then just like having smaller groups of people completing tasks. And making sure there's accountability. Efficacy, attitudes toward the task performed better when results were evaluated. So also evaluation. For people that have high efficacy, but people with low efficacy, they perform better when the results weren't evaluated. So I think just like recognizing individual differences in getting or completing tasks and kind of like knowing your congregation, I feel like is important, as opposed to just assigning different tasks to like large groups of people and expecting them to get done, because most people won't do it, or they'll be like, oh, this person will do it and I don't have to do anything. I think we all see this play out in like even projects. I think that's like the most practical way that we can like have experienced that. I think I've seen it done in my own life, like when I was a worship leader. I felt like a lot fell on me, but I had a team, but no one like did anything ever, or like everyone just kind of like did their own thing, but never did like what was above and beyond. Like I think I fell into the trap of like maybe I'm a high efficacy person and I didn't get any feedback on like my performance or like what my task was assigned, and I would like not do as much as if I were to have received feedback on how I was doing. So I think that's really interesting to think about, and like just thinking about like how even like church structures are designed, like having like elders and things like that is probably helpful in thinking about like the number of elders. Usually it's a smaller group, but then like maybe for bigger churches, bigger group. And I think like thinking about how perhaps people would feel in situations like that, like I think that's kind of like what could lead to conflict, like this idea of social loafing, like if one person feels like they're doing more than like the group, or like if the group like just assumes that other people are doing these tasks or making decisions that need to be made, and maybe they're not getting done. I don't know, I just think that's really interesting in terms of how churches operate. So I think like maybe I was going to ask you guys what you thought about this, or have you experienced it in either church life or just personal life, this idea of social life.
Okay, I have a question before I answer. You said this towards the beginning. I want to make sure that I understand it. Like, part of social loafing, or one of the reasons people work less hard, is because they won't be recognized for that work because there's so many people. Is that part of it?
Yes.
Okay, so that's why I have a problem with extrinsic faith, because like it's all about that personal gain and that personal benefit rather than the bigger picture. Like that just reminded me of that, like straight up. I'm like, I feel like I see this all the time. Like once the groups become larger and they realize it's not going to be like, thank you so much, Natasha, for like getting this done and like your hard work to this. It's like a group thing. It's like, well, this person will eventually do it. Like this has really no benefit to me personally, which is why I'm like so critical of like that viewpoint. But I feel like this happens all the time. Like I think we get more done when it's like a smaller group. Like it was just a couple people because you realize, oh shoot, like we're really short-handed. Like everybody got to put all hands on deck. Okay, this is what we're gonna do to break it up. But when it comes to like bigger groups, like even like being on cabinet for an organization like last year, like I definitely felt like we did not get as much done as we should have when it was a larger part because people were just kind of like, it will get done. Someone will do it. That was the issue. Someone will do it, and then nobody did it. No. Yeah, I see it happen all the time in my life.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting because I think the church, like, ideally would be above needing accountability or above systems or above, like, ideally the church should just, like, flow and it should be perfect.
Right.
But I think there are definitely, like, things we need to implement in the church to make it run well. And ideally, social loafing should never be a thing in the church, right? Like, we all work hard, we all care, we're self-driven, we're not extrinsic, we're all intrinsic. But it's just, like, not how it works because we're human. Which is just really interesting. Like, the church should ideally be above all this.
Right.
And we're not.
Well, if you think about it, like, when it comes to, like, jobs and, like, corporations, you're being paid for your work. So that's your way of getting recognition. It's like, I'm paying you for this. A lot of times in, like, church settings, it's volunteer hours. It's community service. It's for the betterment of the church itself. But I think we also have to keep in mind that the church is made up of fallen human beings. And I think we put way too much, we hold the church on this pedestal, as we should, because it's supposed to be a reflection of Christ. But we hold it on this pedestal as if, like, okay, we're good, we don't need any other, like, underlying structures to help it function. And I think that's where we are falling into this idea of, like, social loafing, because we're filled with all human beings, I think.
Right. I was thinking about, just kind of like how this principle kind of shows us our inherent sinfulness, like that we're doing this without even like really, I think like we were talking about like really thinking about it as far as like extrinsic faith goes, like instead of following Jesus' example of like humility and service and just like doing it and like being like, I don't need recognition or I don't need like everyone to see what I'm doing. That kind of makes me wonder like how do you practically like build up like intrinsic faith into your congregations, like besides like the, like systems and things like that. I feel like those are helpful. Although like everyone I feel like hates that. I just inherently just like I hate the idea of structure and just like want to push against it.
Right.
It's so funny. I think the further you are along your walk with God, I feel like social loafing should be less and less of a thing.
Right.
Because you should be motivated in the verse in the 1 Corinthians or whatever, that's like, in everything you do, do it for the excellence of God.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting. It's like, we should not.
But I still feel like it like I could see it happening, and I see it happening. Like I feel like if you look for it, like you'll see it, and I think it's just kind of something that like continues, even like if you're further along in your walk with God. I don't know. I don't know that like falls away all the time. I don't know. And then there's also like the whole idea of like is there levels of like spiritual maturity and all that stuff.
Right.
Like. I don't know. Just like some people just get this and some people don't. Like,
or it's more natural for some people. You also mentioned, I think, in the reading that there's a section, just like on the research that was done, that like in smaller groups more work is done than if it's like a larger group. I think that's one way that research can like show and reveal like social loafing, because it's not, you're not observing somebody's heart and their inward intentions, but you're seeing the work that's and the work that's getting done. So I think that could be good, like research, like more research that could be done in that way, like how much is actually getting done when there's no recognition of individual people. That could show the levels of social loafing.
But maybe that's where extrinsic faith could come more into it, of like doing things. Maybe it's not, maybe it's not bad to have that like external lens to push you on. Like,
I think that's what it's saying here because there's a part where it says like if the small group are given a more difficult task as opposed to an easier task, like they'll be more likely to complete it. So that makes me feel like the extrinsic faith like comes into that. Like, like if like this is much harder, like people will see that we've completed this really grand thing. Like then we want to be a part of that.
Or even extrinsic in a smaller group, like a group project. If it's like 3 of us, I know like I'm doing it because like I need to for the other people, and I feel like that can be extrinsic. Like I'm doing it so that they respect me still after this. Yeah. So that's why I think extrinsic and intrinsic often mix more than we think.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Conflict management.
Oh, baby.
Conflict.
I'm ready.
Conflict.
We don't have
conflict.
What's conflict?
Perfect.
Okay, so this is a big topic, so we're going to do number 8. Discuss good conflict management principles that can be used in a local church.
I'm ready.
All that stretching.
Oh, yeah.
So Kaufman talks about this in chapter 12, and he starts with saying that kind of like in a biblical perspective, that on an organizational level, the events described in Acts 15 generate the most detailed account in the Bible of a church-wide dispute. So he like kind of talks about the points that are important in that specific instance of church conflict, and then he goes on to like describe in more detail all of the ways to manage it with like his own kind of framework for managing church conflict. But I'll read these ones first. And it says, first, all parties to the dispute were represented, and the clear implication is that all were given the opportunity to speak freely. Second, intense and lengthy debate was permitted. And then third, waiting on God's Spirit played a key role in the resolution. Fourth, each side was ready to give a bit to achieve a unified outcome. So all of those together are kind of like what he builds his framework on for these. I think there's like 8 kind of like key things that he talks about in managing church conflict. So he says the first is a prayerful approach to divine leading. So he says like that's the way you need to start, and that's like a way to make sure that you are creating like a biblical atmosphere and spiritual atmosphere that is required to lead discussion of issues. I'm behind that. I'm into that. He says second is a commitment to the time needed. So just being invested in the time and energy to discuss those issues, and the effort that will be required to answer these difficult questions that will likely come up in conflict. And then he says third is to seek agreement on core facts and essential beliefs. So he goes on to describe like just focusing on things that are important and allowing the core and essential things to be the things that you really need to like work through, as opposed to all the little extra things. I kind of think of this as like, is this a salvation issue kind of deal? And that doesn't necessarily mean that all conflict is based on things that are just like salvation issues. There can be other things that we have conflict, but as long as your core beliefs are the things that you're working through, I think it's more just to find overlap instead of all the areas that you obviously aren't agreeing on, in order to bring unity as you can dispute things. So the fourth is to employ the strategy of the soft answer.
What is the soft answer?
The soft answer is, it says in Proverbs 15:1, it is written that a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. So just being quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. So just using that scriptural wisdom in order to speak to each other and avoid heated and provocative language. So that it like lessens the attack kind of mentality and the hardened nature that sometimes conflict can bring up. Yeah, so then he says the fifth is to employ the dynamics of appropriate self-esteem. So just when a person is confident of their own values, they're in the best position to disagree with others constructively, is what he says. So just being sure that you're like sure of what you believe, but like not feeling like you're threatened by someone else kind of pushing against that. So yeah, that was something that I guess was argued in a previous feeling of security and confidence about our own self and our own faith provides the context for constructive conflict management, according to DeVries. So I find that interesting. But I feel like it makes sense because I feel like when we're unsure of our beliefs, that's when we can become most insecure about like receiving pushback sometimes. And maybe that would make us more prone to being kind of like I said, hardened or just unable to receive critical feedback. He says the sixth is agree to disagree. He says there's a story of Paul and Barnabas, uses a story of Paul and Barnabas to illustrate that disagreement is a common human condition and that differences need not completely destroy the potential for Christian peace. And then seventh is seek an environment of unity. So I think this is kind of like connected to all of the others and probably just pretty foundational. So just talking about how in Luke Luke and Paul both talk about the need that Christians show oneness in faith. Even through disagreement. And then I think the last one is the same as the first, and that's a prayerful approach to divine leading. So I like the way he ends this. He says, any list of suggestions for dealing with religious conflict must end as it began, with an emphasis on God through the presence of the Holy Spirit. So, yeah. I think that's a very thorough detailed list to managing church conflict, and I feel like it's really just used to handle probably any conflict. And I think that it really ties on the biblical framework for just truly loving your neighbor and loving God. How do you guys feel about this list?
I really liked it.
Do you feel like there's anything that can be added or taken, like, I don't know, or what do you think like stands out to you as like very important?
There's one part I actually disagreed with, and you guys definitely can like push back on this.
Yeah.
But it was the like being confident and being sure of where you're at before like moving forward. I guess I just say there's a balance to that. Because I think if someone's coming forward with, I am right, I know I'm right, I'm confident in my answer, you're not going to hear anything that person actually has to say. And a lot of times, and what I've been realizing when it comes to conflict, it's not black and white. It is not, this is right and this is wrong, case closed, end of discussion. Like, that's not the case at all. Like, there are elements of truth, I think, in a lot of different areas. And so I think to have a very fruitful discussion and talk about conflict and have people more willing to engage in dialogue where there's disagreements, you have to be willing to say like, hey, like, yes, that's a good point, that's actually true. Here's where I disagree with you though. So like, yes, stand firm maybe at the core of what you're standing for. But I don't know, I kind of got the vibe a little bit of you need to be point blank 100% confident in where you're standing before you move forward in a disagreement. Because like we mess up sometimes, and like sometimes what we say comes across in a certain way that we may not have meant to like perceive like in other people or in ourselves. So I don't know, that's one part that I was like, yes but no.
Yeah.
So that's actually,
We talked about self-esteem.
Yeah.
So I think that's like where I would say healthy self-esteem, but then on terms of the issue, coming at it from a humble perspective.
Absolutely.
So I think like self-esteem, I would say self-esteem would relate to like your identity in Christ, and then that would tie into what you're saying of like a humble, like I am loved by Christ, I am holy, like, but I'm human and flawed. So definitely having a healthy self-esteem perspective. I also think the thing I disagree with that also was, like having a healthy self-esteem. But then I feel like often in church conflict, you have to kind of allow the man-made power plays to crumble. I would say, like if some of the body of Christ comes to the elders and pastor and say this, like I think you kind of have to equalize that point. say like, okay, but we're all followers of Christ, which I think is very difficult to do, especially when there's like spiritual education. Like pastors have education, hopefully, like an MDiv or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe this will help you guys. I probably just didn't read it very well, but they later in this paragraph say.
Summarize 8 points.
It says the paradox inherent in this view, in this phrase, is that it allows Christians to be very confident concerning their views on conflictual issues while confessing that as humans we always see through less darkly. Confident humility of this stance allows believers the freedom to view those with whom they differ as valued members of God's creation, and therefore worthy of respect, even though there's disagreement with their theology and or religious purposes. So that kind of makes us feel better about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I still I agree. I feel like sometimes it can be like very yeah, be confident, but also don't be so confident to the point where you can't like be humble and say like, oh, like you still have valid like what you think is not just like needs to be like thrown out the window like because you're stupid or whatever. Because that's not a way to ever engage someone in like a conflict issue that would like end well. Like you can't just completely discount and like everything they think.
And that's where I would say Christianity differs the most from the secular realm is healthy respect of self and other. Like I know like especially in our generation it's very like yes queen, like do whatever you want, love yourself, treat yourself. Like it's so self-oriented, and I think Christianity has that beautiful difference of loving other as well, even in conflict.
Right. I think also like this may seem obvious, but when it comes to dealing with conflict, I think we forget sometimes that like loving others I think needs, I don't want to say it should be more important, but like I think sometimes we just get so focused on being right, but we do it in such a hateful and like condescending way towards others that I don't think what you're even arguing about is of importance, because now this person's self-esteem may be destroyed or their self-worth or whatever. Like I just think that it's, I don't know, I'm not explaining this well, but I think there does need to be a level of loving and having a soft answer. I don't know, when it comes to like dealing with this stuff, rather than like I was right, you were wrong, end of discussion. You know.
Yeah.
Let me just put more wood in the fire. But like all these steps that like you've given, okay, how would we apply that to the bomb burger situation that's like going on campus?
Oh my God, Natasha!
It's gonna be another 30 minutes.
I know. Wow.
I know it's a big question.
A, get rid of gossip.
Yeah.
B, like stop just writing everything on the forum.
Yeah, the
like,
forum.
let's get, like have like a like let's have a meeting.
No, I think there was.
Was
there was. Well, it was with all of the clubs and like
Okay.
groups on campus.
Okay.
Like we are so divisive. I feel like Christians like we like stir up.
Oh yeah, like
we love.
But like I understand like wanting your voice to be heard and like the need to like respond, like for sure, like don't just like be like a bystander, fine. But at the same time, like what are we really accomplishing by not like all actually like in person and getting together? And
I would say this relates to the protecting the innocent and not the institution of like when people the guy who wrote on the or woman, I'm sorry, I should not have guessed gender. I don't know what gender they were. When they wrote on the forum of minorities, what is it? Minorities are not oppressed, they're just ungrateful. Moment of genius. Like we need to be elevating minority students and listening in love to them first and foremost before we're like listening to the power groups, in my opinion. Like I think it's so blind of us to say like, oh, they're not hurt.
Yeah. Who are you to say that?
Yeah,
right.
Like, or even if like you have, like I love it when we students are like, well, I have one black friend and they weren't offended.
Are fine.
And they're fine. They don't talk about race. And I'm like, well, do you have a space to talk to them about race? Like, are you actually close?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, I think what bothered me most about this whole thing was, well, there's a lot of things, but like one thing that I'm going to talk about is that this no longer became an in-house discussion because he decided to have this, like, he sought out news sources to like like,
yes,
spread this around. Like, now Franklin Graham has something to say. Now Ben Shapiro has something to say.
Wait, I haven't seen any of that.
Yeah,
Franklin
there's
Graham.
at least 4 articles that are out there right now on this topic.
Wheaton.
Yeah, completely destroying Wheaton, and then also putting down the names of Sammy Shields, the vice president.
Oh yeah, and more. Yeah, all of them. Which it's just
go contact them if you want.
That's
talk
absurd.
About it. Now Sammy's getting a crap ton of hate mail as a result, which is what I'm coming back to. What is the focus of what we're trying to accomplish? Because was it worth it for him to get all of this hate from it? So I'm that's the part that really bothers me. There's a lot of disagreements on both sides and a lot of flaws and truths on both sides, but once this became outside of Wheaton's conversation, that's when I was really?
Yeah.
But
really?
Let's talk about discernment of how creepy it is that Christians get involved in things they know nothing about, which you see politically. My dad is tremendously conservative, but he has no actual knowledge on Israel. But he has so many opinions on it. I'm you know nothing. Why do you have such a strong opinion on this? You've never been to Israel. You don't know the culture. You don't actually know what's happening over there. Christians, when Franklin Graham got involved, and he's Wheaton's coming to the progressive left. My parents.
I was are you kidding me?
You weren't there. You don't know the situation. You don't know what the students are actually saying. You don't know how minority students are feeling. It's just so creepy to me that Christians are so blind.
We're so quick to be on the front lines on stuff we know nothing about. It just blows my mind.
Which is kind of why I have a hard time even discussing that, because I literally am so on the outside. I think I read it as a news article at the cookie thing we were doing, and I just I want to have an opinion, but at the same time I have no idea what happened there. I have no idea any of the details besides what I read on the record and on the formal, and it just gets so skewed and
it's so twisted.
Yeah,
people just need to be willing to listen.
Yeah,
I think that's a lot at the core of it. And there's just not a lot of that.
And seek listening. Don't just let it happen when it happens. Find your friends who are in pain or suffering because of this, or
It's funny. I don't remember what passage in the Bible it is. I think it's in the Old Testament. But the Lord was talking to some prophet, and he was my people perish for lack of knowledge. And I think that could be translated to we make ourselves look like idiots because we don't know what's going on.
So true.
We have brains for a reason. We need to seek out actual information. Don't just go off of one little source you heard from this random article you found online and create a whole opinion about it. It's
so
a lot
uninformed.
deeper than that. Yeah.
We need a much more holistic lens.
Okay, we need to move on.
All right.
Although I don't want to, but okay.
All
right, number 9, my last one is, what exactly does attribution theory have to say, assessing the meaning of specific religious behaviors and beliefs? So first I'll just define attribution theory, as Kaufman does in chapter 13. It says this theory is concerned with the fundamental human desire to assign responsibility for behavior and its consequences. He says there are 2 primary sources of responsibility for behavior. The first is the individual character traits of the person performing an activity, and second, the constraints of the environment within which a behavior takes place. So he goes on to say that the researchers analyze the attributions of those who are observers of behavior. The most persistent finding is that non-participants ascribe the causes of an activity to the characteristics of the individual performing the behavior. And that observers assign too much responsibility to the individual and underestimate or ignore the constraints of the environment. So how he talks about this in kind of the idea of specific religious beliefs and behaviors is something he talks about the attributions of Protestant ministers. And he says it was found there that positive performances were attributed to variable and internal causes and aversive outcomes to stable and external factors. It says, ministers may believe that God understands human weakness and forgives human failure, but this knowledge does not interfere with the propensity to engage in a bit of self-defensive attribution. So, like, dangers of pride are regularly recognized in sermons. Taking personal credit for success is apparently an acceptable ministerial practice. So, like, those who... They also studied athletes, talking about comments of individuals on the winning and losing sides of athletic contests, and those who won attributed their success to personal factors such as training, preparation, skill, and then those who lost, and this is true for ministers as well, attributed their failure to internal factors. So, poor officiating, luck, bad weather, injuries, or other factors beyond their control. Yeah, so... Yeah, so I think, what do you guys think of this and how we use it? Yeah.
How would this apply to a congregation?
Yeah,
like a church, just a random church individual.
Right. I think that is something that we do without thinking about it. I'm trying to think of an example in my mind.
I think it would definitely affect how they view the pastor of the church,
right? Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I know I can be super critical of pastors and be like, oh, they they didn't prepare enough, or they don't.
Right.
They need to step up in this game. And it's interesting with the pedestal, who you see. Sorry, this doesn't make sense. But the people in the front on the front stage, you're I would be really critical of that.
Yeah.
Because they've been given a platform.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that it's pretty cool.
But in some ways that, I think, is it Paul that says you will be judged more harshly if you are in a teaching position or a position of leadership, because you are influencing the people that you're speaking to.
Right.
So if you are leading these people astray, he's basically saying you can be critical of them because they have more power than some random other person, you know? So.
No, absolutely. I think this is a very personal example, but in the thinking about the observers assigning too much responsibilities to the individual and underestimating or ignoring the constraints of the environment, I think something that I recognized as I was leading worship was sometimes some Sundays I felt ill-equipped, and it wasn't necessarily because of my own lack of preparation. Sometimes it was, but oftentimes I wondered if people recognize that I only had one band member for each instrument, so it was none of us got a break. We were all tired, and I can only work with what I was given. So what if it sounded bad? That really wasn't my fault. I couldn't make it better unless I don't know, I found someone else to do it, which that's hard and takes a lot of work.
It was out of your control.
Exactly. So the quality of our sound was something that was out of my control, although it probably looked like it was very much within the bounds of my control. Right. Absolutely.
That's a good point.
So just thinking about that, or even thinking about if you hear a bad sermon or whatever, just attribute they didn't prepare well enough, or they just don't know well enough, and maybe they have a PhD in the subject and just had a family emergency, or something like that. Not thinking about the constraints of the environment, or just thinking about having only one lead pastor and there's no one else to preach one Sunday. How exhausting that would be to preach every single Sunday without a break and be doing everything and having no support.
Pastors carry so
much.
Yeah. And I think Christians never attribute systematic injustices. And it kind of makes sense that I think based off the Bible, it makes sense that we look for autonomy and individualization and all those things, because the Bible's so actually, I kind of disagree with this. I think the Bible has a lot of systematic injustice. Like, you look at, like you see ethnic differences in the New Testament, you see so much in the Old Testament. But then on the other hand, it's very individualized of, like, and especially in our generation, very, like, an individualized faith and power, and, like, you have a special relationship with God. So Christians can be so blind to systematic injustice because we like to think that we have autonomy, right? Like, we can overcome our circumstance. And because Christians are powerful and educated and, like, God's on our side, so everyone should be able to overcome the systems or constraints in place.
Yeah.
Which is a very rose-colored glasses way of looking at life, I think.
Yeah. I think I've, like, become more aware sometimes of how critical I can be of, like, other people, not realizing the external circumstances that may be going on. Like what you said just about, like, the band kind of reminded me of just, like, in my personal life, like, this year and, like, last year especially, like, I think being a captain on the track team, like, you are, like, held to a little bit of a higher standard. But I just remember there've been a couple times where, like, I was planning on being at practice and then I wasn't able to because, like, I had a Title IX meeting with people, like, not for me personally, but, like, on behalf of other people on the team. And, like, all these other situations were just, like, going on. And, like, then I would get, like, grief about it later from, like, people on the team, like, oh, why aren't you there? Like, why aren't you doing this? And I don't want to be like, this person's dealing with this, and you have no clue. So it just kind of, like, it reminded me of, like, when I do that to other people, like, oh, why wasn't she here? Like, why wasn't she there? And, like, there are levels of, like, priority, of course, to make sure that, like, people are where they need to be. But I think just having more grace, because now I realize what it looks like on the other side, when it's like this person has no idea, like, where I was at or, like, what conversation I was having with somebody. So,
or, like, I know I get very emotionally burnt out because I try to carry everyone's everything. And so then, like, it's really, like, hard for me when someone tries to tell me something and I'm like, I just don't have the bandwidth for this.
Yeah.
And they see that and they can tell that I don't have the bandwidth for that. And I'm like, I wish I did, but I have so much going on in the background that I just can't, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like you also have to have grace for yourself, too. Of, like,
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine, go ahead.
Well, I guess this kind of goes into a little bit of a different subject, but one of the things I was reading over preparing for this exam was, like, the pros and cons of having, like, a therapeutic, like, community. And we talk a lot about, like, the benefits and how great it is, but, like, we don't talk about some of the negative effects and how, like, burnout is, like, becoming a huge, like, problem, like, issues in, like, a lot of those communities, because when you're constantly, like, pouring stuff on people and dumping things, like, they hold that, and, like, it's almost as if they're carrying that same thing. So, like, that also needs to be taken into consideration as well. Yeah, sorry, that's just random.
No, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, we're ready to
move on. Yeah.
The finale.
Oh, shoot.
Last one.
Gosh, what number is it?
This is 14.
Oh, here we go.
All right.
What role should evangelism? Never evangelism.
Okay, so number 14, what role should evangelism play in the local church? There's a lot of different ways I kind of took this question, and just going through I'll just kind of go through what I have and then we can talk about it. But specifically within, like, the evangelical community, evangelism is huge, like, the central focus of, like, just the whole belief system. But a lot of times it comes from, like, verbal communication. So this is the way that we, like, advocate for our faith. And so in Kaufman's chapter, he talks a lot. I think it's chapter 9 or 10. Just, like, a lot of the Bible verses that they use to back up, like, why this needs to be of central, like, focus and of importance. So in Matthew 28, it talks about Jesus saying, "Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded them." And then later on, Peter explains that all believers should be prepared to give a reason for the hope that they have. Like, don't come, like, uninformed. Like, that's important. And then to kind of, like, seal the deal, in Matthew 10:32 through 33, it says, "Whoever acknowledges me before men, I'll acknowledge you before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I'll deny you also. So, like, all of these verses, this is, I feel like, what a lot of evangelicals are using to say, like, we need to evangelize, like, and this needs to be of central focus and importance in everything that we're doing, because this is what we're called to do. But what kind of took me back from this is, how do we define, like, evangelism, and what does that look like? And if there's only one sole way of doing that. And I am a firm believer that there are many ways that you can evangelize someone. It doesn't just have to be through, like, verbal. And I think Dr. Bowman was talking about this too, when I think he has, like, a family member who's not able to communicate, like, verbally. So you have to figure out, how do you evangelize to someone or love someone when it's not through words? And especially in a society where we focus so heavily on words, we have to dig a little bit deeper. So that's one important thing. For me personally, I think I've been, maybe my balance is a little bit off, but I think when it's been tilted for so long, I'm starting to switch over a little bit. When it comes to evangelism, I think it comes from our actions. I think that's the best way to evangelize, and how we should deal with that, like within the local church. John 13:35 says, "By this everyone will know that you are truly my disciples, by the way that you love one another." I think a lot of times within the Christian community, and I talk about this, like, all the time, but I just feel so strongly about it, we just do so much talking, but not a whole lot of listening and not a whole lot of action. And so there was a passage that Kaufman said that was, like, almost like a paraphrase of, like, Luke 4, that I thought was really good, that, like, applied to us today. That this is how you know, like, when you're truly evangelizing, and, like, you know that, like, God's presence is in, like, their midst. "Go now and report, the homeless have received housing, the unemployed have jobs, those without health insurance have their needs met, the handicapped and stigmatized are treated with respect, and those without the power to avoid exploitation are freed and empowered." When those words describe the church's activity rather than used just for fun, the church will become a therapeutic community, and one where evangelism is at the focus. That is the important way to evangelize. So for me, that really, like, took me aback, because I think a lot of times in the church, like, when we think about evangelism, it's more of like, okay, like, you need to say the sinner's prayer. Okay, you're going to get into heaven. Check. They're good to go. But then if this person's dealing with, like, drug substance abuse or, like, depression or anxiety, those things don't just, like, magically, like, go away. Like, I mean, I don't want to, like, disclaim it, because, I mean, there are, like, some stories where people are like, once they did that, then, like, upbringing was lifted. But for most people, that's not the case. And I think God has required us, as a way to evangelize and to preach the good news, is to be there for them, for their physical, mental, and emotional well-being, and not just getting them into heaven and checking them off the list. So I don't know, what are your guys' thoughts when it comes to evangelism in the local church? What you've seen before?
I have a few thoughts. First, I think what you have to say is really important on, like, just not checking the box. Like, I think that discipleship is so important to that, like, what's next aspect, because I think that, like, it's so left out a lot of the times. And then when you were saying, like, what the church should be, like, kind of described in Kaufman, as opposed to, like, what it shouldn't be. I read an article on the news. I only read the news now, I don't have social media. Probably a good thing. But then I read, like, weird articles like this, where, like, I guess there's this kind of, like, mega church in South Carolina where they're, like, on some, like, reality TV show. So I kind of wonder about even, like, the idea of calling it a church. And he, like, apparently bought his wife a $200,000 Porsche. And then, like, everyone was questioning, like, oh, like, where'd that money come from? Like,
your tithes.
And then that's, like, what he like, had, like, completely being like, no, like, I saved that money from, like, the TV show and, like, all this other stuff. So just, like, the thought of, like, how can a pastor say, this is a gift for my wife because I worked really hard for this money? Like, we're supposed to be good stewards. Like, how is that being a good steward of your money? It's not. Like, so that just blew my mind. And then, like, thinking, my boyfriend and I were talking yesterday about, like, is the church for, like, and I feel like this is just, like, maybe really broad about this kind of question, but is the church, like, supposed to be for the believers or, like, for the unevangelized? Because I think there's like definitely churches that are more like geared towards like seeker sensitive, being seeker sensitive, and then there are ones that are more geared towards like believers.
Right.
And I think perhaps I'm getting this wrong, but I think the Anglican church is more geared towards like the churches for the believers, and then like other denominations perhaps are more like, oh, we're like seeker friendly, and like you don't have to believe in God, so like even take part in the Lord's Supper and like things like that. Like you know, everyone's welcome.
Yeah.
So like I guess that kind of like this question makes me think of that, like what role does evangelism play in a local church, but also like who is the church for?
Yeah.
Who do you
Also,
because I don't know.
Yeah, so when I was at the summit, they, one of the speakers talked about how the church is often like a pendulum, which I think every human does, and it's just on a macro level. Like, we swing from like being really, one of the examples she used was being really evangelistic and like focusing on that and bringing in new members and blah, blah, blah. And then we swing, we're like, oh my gosh, we've brought in so many members, now we need to focus on discipleship and growing the church and community and like, and then you swing back to evangelism and you're like, oh, we have important in the community. And she said it's hardest to walk in the middle because you have the most tension between the two ends. She's like, it's really easy to swing on issues, and that was literally the example she used was evangelism and not. And I think we need to have a healthy balance of like, yes, we're being evangelism focused on like bringing in our friends and being conscious of that. And I feel like that kind of applies to the like Monday through Saturday aspect of church. Of, like, you know, like pouring into people outside of the church and like caring about them. But then on Sunday it's like rest and pouring into the church, and then like your Bible study nights, like pouring into the people God's brought to be in your life. You said something else I wanted to talk about.
So would you say that like the church service specifically is for the people who are already believers, those who are evangelized? Because that's something I've struggled with, like from what you said before. I was like, shoot, like I really don't know. Like we should be striving to bring people who don't know the Lord to church, but like what is the purpose of church?
Right.
And what is the purpose of the service itself? You know?
Yeah. I guess it can be both.
Yeah.
Like I feel like it is both, and it's supposed to be both. Like yes, it's supposed to like nourish the believer, but also like there should be something there that invites the unbeliever in and says like I want to be a part of this.
Almost to see like what they have, I want.
Right. Because I mean, the church and like the body of Christ is like, you know, supposed to be like, I don't know, almost like the image of God, like on here on earth, and like a sign of it. So I feel like understanding and seeing that, like actual gathering of people that all like, oh not all, but like mostly probably like profess faith in Christ is probably like something that you don't see obviously outside of the church. So I feel like almost like that's like a sign of like God's like presence in the world, where perhaps like you can go throughout your day without seeing unless you like are in a church.
I went to a church community fellowship here that every week he referenced the people who were new. He was like, if you're new, and he would always say the gospel message in different ways each week, which I think is both good for the new people and the congregation, because we need to hear the gospel continually. And so, he would always say, like, if you're new here, like, this is the message you need to hear. But then he always had application points for the congregation, so I think, and I love that every week, regardless of if there are new people or not, who knows if there are new people that week, but like he always said the gospel message of like faith, repentance, response. Like, I think that's the way we get to do it. It's like both the example of discipleship, but then
That like meeting.
we're good.
I think we're good. Okay.
I have to pee like a fracking break.